the top 10 players that Tennessee will have to face in 2023. And this
From the
list is
SEC specifically.
in the SEC specifically. And this list is brought to you by Craft Treats. I'll tell you more about that momentarily. So if you were to look at this last year, you'd probably have Stetson Bennett up high. Despite all the knocking, he ended up playing really well in his final year. And I think he answered a lot of questions even before last season. You would have Bryce Young. You would have maybe Will Levis at the time. You may even have Spencer Rattler. It was a very strong quarterback class as far as guys that were going to take the field. Caleb, that is not the case this year. When I look at your list without giving anything away, the top 5 are defensive, 3 are defensive players, and 1 is a tight end. Before we get into those, as far as the top SEC stars that Tennessee will face in the upcoming 2023 season, how different does this list look in just a year? Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps us bring more people into the channel. But this list, I gotta look for the acronym QB. That's not easy to find.
Yeah, it was really, really hard for me to compile this list because last year was a lot easier when I was doing it. You're right. It was Bryce Young, Stetson Bennett. I believe, I think I might have had Malik Neighbors. No, I can't even remember, but I was at another place when I was doing that then. And it was a lot easier for me to compile that list. This list was so difficult. And full disclosure, I try to spread it out when it gets a little tight for tiebreakers because I don't want everybody on the list to be a Georgia or Alabama guy. You know what I mean? It's like and that gets a little bit, that makes it tricky. So I went a little communist and spread the wealth a little bit to other teams. But
you can't go a little communist. When you go communist, you're all in.
Okay, how about socialist?
Okay, yeah, very socialist list, but I thought appropriate. I mean, again, you could name 3 Georgia players on their defensive front if you wanted to, and so
let's think Georgia's whole offensive line is the top 5 if I wanted to.
There you go. So what player concerns you the most? I don't want to say scares you the most. Go ahead and fill it in on the message board. And Mr. Jones said stepson Bennett, which reminds me of the redheaded stepchild, which I've become aware that I'm not anymore. If you go up and ask somebody my hair color, they say blonde. Caleb, we discussed this on SEC Media Days. So tell me on the message board, is my hair red or blonde, which means white? And let me get your thoughts on that. But in particular, what player concerns you the most? What SEC player concerns you the most on Tennessee's schedule? So let's start from the top and work our way down. Ainias Smith, running back, Texas A&M. Ooh, doesn't jump off the page, but you're right.
Yeah, he was hurt last year, and people forget this, but he had over 500 total yards. He had over 500 yards rushing his first 2 years. He had over 800 yards from scrimmage in 2020, and he was a punt return specialist, averaging over 11 yards a punt return, running one back for a touchdown 2 years ago. If he's fully healthy, I mean, he could be like their Alvin Kamara. So just watch out.
All right, linebacker, Missouri, Tyron in the hopper.
Should have been a first-team All-SEC guy. 13.5 tackles for a loss. There's questions about Missouri's defense and their team as a whole, but he is not one of those questions.
And he has better hair than Eli Drinkwitz. Princely Milan. I did my best. Florida, defensive lineman. You say he should have been preseason first-team All-SEC.
Yeah, I think the best all-around defensive lineman in the SEC. I mean, he's about 260, but he can line up in the middle if necessary sometimes, and he can play on the end in a 3-4. And I mean, we're talking 9.5 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, 4.5 sacks. And honestly, Dave, you know this, when you're playing up front, 39 tackles is a lot of tackles. That's making a lot of plays.
No doubt. All right, and I love my guy, Caleb, because he goes an offensive lineman from Alabama, and he respects the offensive line play, which a lot of people his age and that Gen Y or whatever he does, or whatever he is. They don't respect that. But J.C. Latham is every bit as important to Alabama as Darnell Wright was last year. I mean, he is a guy who's going to be able to open up holes at right tackle. He's going to be able to, you would think, be able to negate some great pass rushers. So, J.C. Latham, kudos to you for picking an offensive lineman at number 7 before we get to our first quarterback.
Yeah, and J.C. Latham was at SEC Media Days last week, and that speaks a lot about Nick. That always says something when a coach brings an offensive lineman to SEC Media Days. That gives you a hint of what they really think of them.
Yeah, and I was talking to Scout last year, not to get sidetracked about Darnell Wright, and I was thinking, yeah, Darnell Wright would have been good at this thing last year, but they did bring Trey Flowers, and I thought they should have. That was their defensive player, and then they brought Hooker, and they brought Cedric Tillman. But I thought, man, Darnell Wright would have been good at this. But I was talking to the scout. The scout said, Dave, we had nothing on this guy. We did not think that he was going to be even close to a great player. So I wonder if Tennessee's coaches kind of thought the same thing. It would have been 3 offensive players. It's just me thinking aloud. Then you get to a quarterback, Devin Leary at Kentucky. You right. Probably the only good quarterback Tennessee football will face this year. Well, that seems to say a lot, but I tend to agree with you because the quarterback class in the SEC is just down, down, down.
It's awful. And Tennessee doesn't have to play LSU or Arkansas. And those are the two best quarterbacks. No, the other thing about this, who's shared all SEC with Joe Milton? Will Rogers, KJ Jefferson, Jaden Daniels. Guess who Tennessee doesn't have to play this year? Mississippi State, Arkansas, or LSU. So, I mean, they just completely avoid all the good quarterbacks in the SEC. And Devin Leary, look, whole boy threw for 3,500 yards, 35 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions a couple of years ago. And I know that's in the ACC, but quite honestly, that's still pretty darn impressive. We were talking about him before we were talking about Drake May. And now, by the way, Liam Cohen is back at Kentucky. I keep saying this. That's the most schools that got new offensive coordinators at Tennessee this year, in the SEC this year, made bad hires. Kentucky made a good one. Liam Cohen's a dangerous OC.
Yeah, I like how you say Devin Leary, your homeboy, because a lot of people don't know that Caleb and Devin are distant cousins. All right, let's get into the top 5. We have Antoine Wells, Jr., wide receiver at South Carolina, James Dumas-Johnson, I don't want to pronounce it the other way, linebacker, Georgia. And then I'm going to tell you who I would have in the top 3. You have Kool-Aid McKinstry, the defensive back, Alabama, Brock Bowers, tight end, Georgia, and then Kamari Lassiter, defensive back out of Georgia. I would actually have Kool-Aid number 1, me personally, and then I would have Brock Bowers a close number 2, not only for the best SEC players that Tennessee will face this year, but if those guys happen to be side by side in the NFL draft, and let's forget about need. I got into a conversation with Tyler Ivins of the Sports Animal. Who are you taking, McKinstry or Bowers? I would take McKinstry in both situations, but it sounds like you would take Bowers as far as better college player. And I'm curious if they were sitting there at 5 and 6 in next year's NFL draft, and you need a defensive back and you need a tight end. Bowers is a transcendental tight end that could be up there higher than usual, but defensive back is probably the safer pick. So compare and contrast those two before we get to why you pick Lassiter.
Well, for NFL, you're probably right with McKinstry because cornerbacks are harder to come by than tight ends in the NFL. I think tight ends are borderline on running backs at this point, where there's such a supply of good tight ends where it's more about how well you use them than it is anything else. There's very few Jason Wittens in the NFL, but Brock Bowers, I mean, could be that. So, but I'm with you. I'd still go Kool-Aid McKinstry. I can't get past what Tennessee did to Alabama last year through the air, and Kool-Aid was starting on that team. And that's sticking in my head. I know he wasn't guarding Jalen Hyatt in the slot. Forget that. A 15-second drive went to Tennessee's 2 wideouts. I believe he was on Ramel Keaton for that last catch. And I'm sorry, I got to put that on him.
All right, so that leads us to today's tough question, and it's brought to you by Craft Treats, now that we've had the opportunity to go over it, today's tough question is quite simply, who's the toughest opponent that Tennessee will face?
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
Brought to you by Craft Treats. They have the chill pills that have the CBD derivatives in it that will help with your pet's digestive issues, will help with your pet's arthritis issues or anxiety issues. Go to crafttreats.com and use the simple promo code Off the Hook to get 20% off. Off the Hook to get 20% off. I love your list. It's gotten clicked on like a gajillion times, so that's good. But it's Spencer Rattler. It's none of your 10 guys, Caleb. It's Spencer Rattler.
I addressed that.
I know you did. Share with the listeners who like to consume information and content via audio and video as opposed to reading. We're all different. And it's in your column, but it's still Spencer Rattler.
It is Antoine Wells Jr., the receiver. That was the reason Tennessee struggled with South Carolina last year. They couldn't guard Wells. It took South Carolina and, who was their offensive coordinator last year? Satterfield? Was that his name? My mind just drew a total blank for a second. It took them till November to realize they had a weapon in Wells, and they started using him because he torched Tennessee, and then he torched Clemson, and now he's first-team All-SEC, and it's all because of what he did at the end of the year. It wasn't Rattler. It's that they figured out that they have a guy for Rattler to throw to. Wells is the threat for South Carolina.
Let me tell you why Spencer Rattler is the number one threat. Have you ever been to a Cheesecake Factory, the restaurant?
Yeah, there's way too many things to order at a Cheesecake Factory.
Way too many. It takes 30 minutes to get through the appetizer section. They tried to do too many things with Spencer Rattler this year. I've already been told by a really good source in South Carolina, they're going to dumb this thing down. It's going to be a lot easier. They now know what he does well. Now, if I'm South Carolina fan, I'm looking at Shane Beamer and I'm saying, why didn't you figure that out earlier in the season? I think it's an indictment of his coaching. I was also told by a really good source in South Carolina that he would love the Oklahoma job. Just saying. Okay, but let's start, and that's no joke. But let's start with how they mishandled Spencer Rattler and how they handled him towards the end. And they handled him a lot better. They did things that were a lot more simple. So instead of going to the Cheesecake Factory where the menu is way too big, they're going to go to what I like to drop into every once in a while, the taco carts. So we have frequently in my area, we have tornado issues. So the taco carts will show up to feed the workers who come in from all over the country to rebuild homes and take down trees and that sort of thing. So there is a taco cart that is on the way from the gym to my house that I can stop in and I can get 3 tacos for like $8. Well, there's not a lot of choices in those tacos. There's chicken, beef, and shrimp. Bingo. That's what they're going to do with Spencer Rattler. He is going to ride the taco cart to success, or he's going to fail miserably again because he's got the Cheesecake Factory menu in front of him. And I think he'll have the taco cart menu. That's why he's number one. Hit like and subscribe.
There's a gigantic flaw in your argument.
You just can't get analysis like that. We're talking food. We're talking lunch. Click like and subscribe. I'll give you your chance, but I'm 100% right. But here you go, Caleb. What is your take on that? Taco cart Rattler.
South Carolina's.
Travis, give me a little bit of credit. That is a pretty good analogy. He had the Cheesecake Factory initially, and it was too much for the entire offense to handle. They're going to dumb it down. That's what they did against Tennessee and Clemson.
Or it's like because Jaru and I went there last week during SEC Media Days. It's like Raising Cane's. You can only order chicken basically. But I see your point. All right, here's the flaw. They brought in Dowell Gaines as offensive coordinator. And guess what? I have the unique distinction of being a Titans fan and having been tortured by his stupidity. This is a guy that chose not to bring in Peyton Manning in 2012 because he felt Jake Locker could pick up complexities as quickly as Peyton Manning could. And then he opened up the offense for Jake Locker when he had Chris Johnson as his running back instead of simplifying it. And Jake Locker was a disaster. And that's what's going to happen with South Carolina this year because Dowell Gaines thinks everybody can handle the most complex. It's going to be like how Randy Sanders thought Eric Gaines could just handle everything Peyton Manning could in 2005 and threw the entire playbook at him.
That's what last year was to Spencer Rattler to me. I think it's going to be different this year. And if I'm wrong, if they throw everything at him, then everything I said is moot.
You were probably right. You were probably right about Rattler, but they did not hire the offensive coordinator who would do that. They hired an offensive coordinator who is dumb as a box of rocks and thinks everybody around him can handle anything. And so, I mean, it's
dumb as a box of rocks and go kick rocks are two of my favorite sayings. And
I'm sorry. I know I need to dial back, but I take my feelings on Gaines personally because he was so bad as the Titans OC. So transcendently, horrifically bad.